Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, please, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, please take your seats. We are going to start the NAT Commission meeting in a moment. Please. Thank you. I've never tried this, but that was the first and last time. Kiitoksia, arvoisat
Okay. Good morning, colleagues. It's a pleasure to see so many of you here for this last meeting of our commission. We've got a short agenda for today's meeting, but that's great because it gives us an opportunity to talk about the work that we've done over the last 5 years. And we'll also be able to deal with the appointment of some rapporteurs and then obviously discuss a couple of opinions towards the end. Let me start by telling you something about the languages available today. You can speak and listen to French, German, English, Italian, Spanish, Dutch, Greek, Danish, Finnish, Czech, Polish and Slovene. So you can listen and speak to all those languages. In addition to those, you can speak but not listen to the following. Portuguese, Swedish, Latvian, Lithuanian, Hungarian and Romanian. So those are the languages you can speak but not listen to. So let's move on to item 1, the adoption of the agenda. Does anybody have anything they'd like to say about the agenda today? Can we adopt it? Okay, item 1, we've adopted the agenda as drafted. Let's move on now to the approval of the minutes of the 25th Commission meeting. Any comments on those, or can we approve them? Any comments on the minutes? No. Okay, so I take it then that the minutes of the last meeting have been approved. And under item 3, the statement by the chair, this meeting will finish early in the afternoon, and I'd like to invite all members present after the meeting to come along to Atrium V's, which is Atrium 5, sorry, on this floor for a lunch reception to mark the last meeting of this particular commission during our mandate. So that is how I hope we can end our meeting today, with a lunch reception in Atrium 5 on this floor. Let's move on. Now, the Secretariat has produced and circulated a list, a kind of summary of all the work that we have done together, members and the Secretariat, all the work we've done over the last 5 years. I hope you've received the document. I'm holding it up now. It sets out the work, the opinions, all the events, everything that we have done over the last 5 years. And I have to say, it took my breath away when I saw how much we had done. We've all been very active in this commission, and I read through it. I can see, you know, we had a meeting with, we are going to pass this on to Mr. Katainen, the Vice President of the Commission. He'll be moving back to Finland to do other things. It'll certainly give him some reading material, and it certainly shows very clearly what the NAT Commission has done. I would like to mention a few points about our work. It's going to be a fairly lengthy presentation, but then thereafter I promise I won't say all that much. It's been really wonderful working in the NAT Commission. This is my last Commission meeting here at the Committee of the Regions. I've been in the committee for about 20 years now, and I want to take this opportunity to say a bit more than just a quick goodbye. Now, when I started, this institution was just coming into being. We didn't know exactly what it was going to be like, what shape it would take. There was this idea it was competing with other bodies, and now it really has taken shape, and that's thanks to the work of members such as our selves. Now, in the last 5 years, we've managed to advance all our policy areas, and that's been possible thanks to your input, the commitment of NAT members, and the involvement of the Secretariat. Let me give you some examples. In civil protection, we extended our contacts to the United Nations and the European Investment Bank. And we even signed a joint agreement with the United Nations Disaster Risk Reduction Office, the UNDDR. We participated at high-level conferences organised by the UN and the European Commission, and we showed the COR's support for victims of natural disasters in a visit to Italy in 2016. We also adopted opinions in the presence of the EU Commissioner, and that was important because it showed that the Commission was keen to work with us. And we also managed to convince the EU to grant support for recovery measures post-disaster to the tune of 100% through structural funds. Now, in the field of health, we concluded a memorandum of understanding with the World Health Organization. So that was how our work with the UN was pursued. Our delegations were invited to the Ministerial Conference on Environment and Health, as well as to WHO headquarters in Copenhagen, where we had a series of bilateral meetings with high-level staff members from the WHO. Our expertise in health systems, which was highlighted in two opinions, led the Commission to involve our committee in its expert working group on health systems performance assessment. Our rapporteurs on e-health and on community-based care were invited by the presidencies of the EU to address their high-level conferences. We have frequently met Commissioner Andriukaitis and have recently been asked by the Commission's Vice President Frans Timmermans to come up with an outlook opinion on cross-border healthcare. I think we can be proud of the reputation we've built for ourselves over the years, and it is really wonderful to see this recognition and respect amongst the health community and more broadly. Now, in the field of agriculture and rural policy, we organised 2 joint meetings with the Agri Commission of the EP and also had several meetings with the EP Intergroup on rural, remote and mountainous regions. We pushed for a white paper on rural areas and put forward ideas on innovation and modernisation of rural areas. I think we can see that the European Commission has acknowledged the need for a rural agenda. Our work on the CAP is recognised by the European Commission and the European Parliament. We stress the importance of creating better conditions for young farmers and on reducing administrative burden. In the area of fisheries and maritime policy, we worked closely with Commissioner Carmenu Vella and DG Mare on promoting agriculture, on fisheries in small communities, on ocean governance, on blue economy, and so much more. Things move forward slowly, but they are moving in the right direction, also thanks to our efforts. The most recent opinion on maritime industries has already led to a lot of attention from the European Commission. Also, our work in the Atlantic strategy field is also crucially important. More importantly, our work on the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund has had a real impact on the draft EMFF regulation and on the position of the European Parliament in this respect. Moving on to food now, foodstuffs. We've been participating actively in the Commission's platform on food waste and food losses. I personally hope that my successor can continue this important work. We've shown the importance of local food systems and sustainable production. We will either participate in the European Parliament's European Food Forum, or here at the COR we will create our own European Food Council. We have worked on procurement for local food and on a better alcohol strategy for the European Union. In the area of consumer policy, we stressed the importance of consumer-friendly food labelling and participated in the launch of Commissioner Jourova's New Deal for Consumers. Moving on to tourism. We are pushing for the recognition that this growing sector deserves. It's the third biggest economic sector in the EU, with 10% of employees depending on the tourism sector for their work. We've also worked on coastal and maritime tourism. We put forward a coherent strategy for Europe's tourist industry. We contributed to the creation of the first smart specialisation platform on tourism, and we're part of virtually every single tourism event and working forum over the last few years. We're also one of the members of the jury awarding the title of the European Capital of Smart Tourism, and we will continue our work on tourism modernisation, on sustainability and resilience. Moving on to forestry. We've been in close contact with the Commission and with all stakeholders, with regions and forest associations. We have highlighted the local and regional dimension of forest policies. Our opinions on the forest strategy were important steps, both from the point of view of the economic relevance of the sector and in terms of climate change contributions. Now, this list that I've just raced through is not exhaustive by any means, but it already gives an impression of the amount and relevance of our work over the past 5 years. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the rapporteurs for their important work. Thank you for your political commitment and also for your personal interest and motivation, which has always guided the work that you've done. I can say on behalf of all NAT members that it was a privilege to have you all here in our meetings and beyond. All of this was supported by numerous other activities. Many of you participated in our events. Many of you even organised NAT events in your hometowns and regions. So I'd like to express my gratitude to all of you who've done precisely that. Organising NAT conferences and seminars outside of Brussels, Gaia in Portugal, Hessen in Germany, Zwolle in the Netherlands, Galicia in Spain, Szombathely in Hungary, Innsbruck, Austria, Palma in Spain, Pylos in Greece, Nantes in France, Hastings in the UK, and Gozo in Malta. All those places have hosted NAT Commission events. So thank you very much for those events that were so very well organised and where so much wonderful hospitality was shown. Let me move on to the future. I have to say something about the future, even though it's not for me to steer the process anymore. The NAT remits are more relevant than ever in a changing world. Our economies, our policies and our lives are so interconnected that we cannot make decisions in silos anymore. Let me give you a few examples of that. Now, as a patient, your health does not depend only on the medication you take, but on the food you eat, the air you breathe, the water you drink, the transport that you use, and also the area where you live. Someone may die of an infection because he's become antibiotics resistant due to intensive farming methods. There's also a greater risk of heart failure if the food you eat is saturated with trans fats, sugars and chemical agents. And it may be that people aren't able to conceive children because of the endocrine disruptors that are used so freely in the toys, cosmetics and plastics industry. And as a farmer, you may be disadvantaged if you strive to move towards organic food production. You may find that you have problems marketing your product, educating consumers and accessing funding. As a consumer, you may not always be able to make informed choices if the information is not available. Consumers may be faced with false claims, with greenwashing and manipulation, and you may sometimes feel that you need a PhD to decipher an ingredient list, and you might need a lie detector in order to distinguish between the truth and lies. Now, the NAT, with its 10 different policy remits, has the opportunity to bridge the gaps and connect meaningfully all these areas. Weaving health into agriculture and aquaculture, connecting civil protection with forestry, joining the dots between consumer protection and food production, linking rural development with coastal and maritime affairs and tourism. All those things give NAT members a unique possibility always to see the bigger picture. Now, this ability to see, understand and evaluate the broader perspective will be the key asset in the new mandate. You will all have read the new Commission's ideas and priorities for what the EU should be doing. They're not a single policy initiative. There are flagship projects such as Farm to Fork, or the Green Deal for Europe, and we're talking always about linkages and influences that one policy area can have on another. Now, those of you who will return to the NAT Commission next year will be privileged to work on these fascinating themes, and I wish you a lot of energy, ideas and enthusiasm for these exciting times ahead. I'd like to end by thanking the other chairpersons of this mandate, José Luis Carnero, Francina Armengol y Socias, who started off the mandate and gave important input. I'd also like to extend a particularly warm thank you to the former NAT First Vice Chair, Tony Buchanan, because he had to step in on so many occasions as chair. So thank you very much for your big time commitment, and I'd like to think that you will come back to the COR in the future in one way or the other. So, ladies and gentlemen, it was an honour to be your chairperson for the last 2.5 years. It's been wonderful getting to know you, to work with you, and I would like to wish you a very successful meeting today and also every success in the future. I won't have much more to say during the official meeting, but I will make a short speech in connection with the lunch. So that was the end of the statement from the chair. Perhaps someone would like to comment on what I've just said.
Tämähän oli tyhjentävä esitys, koska nyt en huomaa yhtään puheenvuoroa, joten kaikki tuli käsitellyksi. Jaha, no niin.
That must have been a very comprehensive presentation because nobody wants the floor. Mr. Mentimoinen, thank you very much, Chairman. Colleagues, I would like to take this opportunity to thank Ossi Martikainen for his good and balanced stewardship of this commission. As chairman, he's very expertly handled the very broad remit that the NAT Commission has in lots of different policy areas. So I would like to wish you every success in the challenges that you will face in the future. It really has been a pleasure and an honour to work here under your stewardship in this commission. So a big thank you to you. Thank you very much, Ilpo. Anthony, please.
Again, thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Ossi. Thank you very much for that reminder of all of the work that's gone on over the last few years, and thanks to yourself for your kind words, and we wish you all the best in the future. I think it would be remiss of me not to mention the fact that, one, I'm still here, that Scotland is still represented. We continue to be so, albeit perhaps hanging on with our fingertips, but we would hope that one way or another issues will be resolved within the UK, and indeed in an ideal world Scotland will be here represented as an independent nation. That said, work is still going on in the NAT Commission. We have still a busy meeting today, but the subjects that we have tackled over the last few years have been tremendous. And I think due praise and thanks must also go not just to our presidents, to our presidential team, to those who have served on the NAT Commission for all of the work that has been done, but also to the NAT Secretariat, who have been steadfast in getting us to this position. It has been an extremely busy few years, and I think to everyone in the Secretariat, I would express my thanks, and I'm sure we share that comment, for all of the hard work, for the support, and for the position that the NAT Secretariat holds within the COR, because I think without doubt it has been one of the standout commissions, and that's a tribute to those who have supported all of us as elected members over the last few years. So my thanks as well to the Secretariat and all concerned. Thank you.
Kiitoksia, Anthony.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Thank you, colleagues. Let me just remind you once again of this document. It's a sort of closing report for this NAT Commission mandate, and you know, keep it with you when you talk to future colleagues about this commission and the importance of its work. So that rounds off item 3. We've still got work to do, so let's press on under item 4, organisation of future work. 4.1. In relation to agenda item 4.1, referrals from the EU institutions, there's no need to appoint any rapporteurs. 4.2, it's the same, and nothing, no own initiative opinions on the basis of documents of other EU institutions. And then 4.3, own initiative opinions for under Rule 4.1b2. There are 3 proposals here. Let's go through these. Topic 1, towards sustainable use of natural resources within the Mediterranean insular context, suggested by the PES group. And we'd have Francina Armengoli-Sothias as the rapporteur. The timetable is the 5th of March for exchange of views, and NAT adoption in April, and then at the plenary in July. Now, the coordinators are suggesting that we adopt this proposal. So this would be drafted by Francina Armengoli-Sothias. Any comments on this?
En näe puheenvuoroja.
Thank you. So the Commission has adopted this unanimously. Let's move on to topic 2. Helping towns and villages drive rural revival in the European Union. This has been suggested by the EA group. There would be the same timetable as for the first topic, March and April in the Commission, and in July the plenary will take place on that. There was a discussion about the tweaking of the title here, such that it would focus more on the dynamic nature of the rural community and rural development. We're very concerned about future financing of rural development work, and all the coordinators wanted the opinion to focus on that. And there's a new title, a new proposal. It would be
Rural Revival.
New strategy for rural revival. It would be drafted by Enda Stenson. Enda, would you like the floor on this?
Thank you very much, and I totally agree with that heading. I think it would be in keeping with the whole revival of the European. I just want to thank my fellow members, and particularly the coordinators and that allowed me to go forward with this, and I will give it my best shot, and we will talk to you later on. I'd be sad that you will not be here at the time of that, and I just personally want to say thanks to you for all you have done. You have been a pleasure to work along with. An absolute pleasure. So, a gentleman as well. I am happy to go with this on issue of opinion, and I'm excited about it, and I'm sure I will get a lot of help, encouragement, some criticism along the way, but we are prepared to take that. Thank you very much.
Kiitoksia Enda. Joo.
Thank you very much, Enda. Thank you for your words, and I'd like to wish you the very best of luck in drafting this opinion. I'm sure it will be a quality opinion, and I'm sure that you're quite happy to take feedback on board and come up with an improved text together with colleagues. Any comments on this? I can't see anybody asking for the floor, so we can adopt that proposal. It will be Enda Stenson that drafts this opinion on the strategy for rural revival. That was topic 2 under 4.3. Let's move on to topic 3. This is something proposed by the NAT Secretariat, working very closely with the Commission's future plans. Obviously, we're trying to preempt what the European Commission will be doing and trying to bring influence to bear on that. The title is From Farm to Fork, the local and regional dimension, suggested by the NAT Secretariat. We discussed this at the coordinators meeting, and we agreed that this would go to Mr. Milan in the PS group. That is a proposal from the coordinators to the Commission. Would there be anybody who'd like the floor on this? If not, so we can accept that Mr. Milano will actually draft this opinion. Thank you very much. And that's dealt with the 3 own initiative opinions, and we've adopted the opinions and their rapporteurs, or the rapporteurs for the opinions, rather, unanimously in this meeting. Let me also mention that there's this business of the opinion on sustainable tourism. The opinion was already approved by the Bureau. This has gone to the Renew Europe group, and the rapporteur is Manuel Cardanete Flores. 4.4, decision not to issue an opinion, renunciations. We don't have to take any decisions today. We just need to inform you that 2 renunciations had been made via the written procedure. That's a proposal for a regulation of the European Parliament and of the Council regarding fishing authorisations for Union vessels in United Kingdom waters and fishing operations of United Kingdom fishing vessels in Union waters. And then a second one about providing financial assistance to Member States to cover serious financial burden inflicted on them following the withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the Union without an agreement. So those have both been dealt with by the written procedure. Let's move on for 5, NAT ongoing work programme. It's for information. Can we adopt that? Good. That's been adopted. 4.6, the NAT follow-up document for information purposes. You should have received that already, ladies and gentlemen. And then 4.7, we've got the confirmation of the dates for next year's meetings. 13th of February, that will be the constitutive meeting. That will be the first... Sorry, I'm getting a bit carried away. So that was the constitutive meeting, the 13th of February. Then we've got the 5th of March and the 22nd of April for Commission meetings. And then on the 18th and 19th of June, we've got an external meeting and conference in Galicia on Santiago de Compostela and tourism associated with that. And then we've got Commission meetings on the 22nd of September and the 23rd of November. Let's move on to 4.8, NAT External Activities 2020. The NAT Commission has received 1 invitation for a trip. It's come from Manuel Alejandra Cardenete Flores. He's invited the NAT Commission to Malaga and Marbella in Andalusia, Spain, to discuss the topic of Andalusia Hub, promoting an international travel technology ecosystem based on data from a more sustainable tourism sector. Now, the idea is now to turn this study visit into a seminar, which would mean that more people can attend it, and we do want the Secretariat to be able to prepare this properly, so perhaps I could now turn to Mr. Cardinetti for a presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. Yes, Yeah, the idea is to try to show you in Marbella, in Malaga, Andalusia, Spain, to do this study visit, this seminar, where we are trying to be able to learn about the real issue that are facing the small and medium companies that make up in the travel industry, focus in cultural, outdoor activities, and understand how Andalusia Hub is the name of our building and our work there is contributing to their competitiveness and growth. So the idea is to try three points. First of all, to visit our center, the co-work with the co-working area. There we host entrepreneurs, freelancers, and a small company related to tech, innovation, and travel. The second point is to show you the demo lab. In the demo lab is a tech showroom where we try to work with travel industry stakeholders. During the visit, we are going to show you some travel companies where we can see the solution that they try to do for small and medium companies. And finally, we want to to link the previous point with the data. For us, it's very important, everything related with data information, and the idea is to explain how the data is a key component for more sustainable and green tourism. Remember that in this session we have approved our consultation report about the tourism, sustainable tourism in Europe. Finally, this activity is very close with the objectives and goal of the opinion toward more sustainable tourism for European Union cities and regions, and the idea is to show you as we are working in Andalusia. Therefore, I'm going to show you some slides where you can see the place. I don't know, perhaps not running. Yeah, it was. No, okay, this is the building that we are going to show you, where we are going to try to explain everything that we are doing with the different companies, entrepreneurships, etc. We do in this lab we do workshops, consultancies. Sorry, workshop, consultancies, some tech demos. There we have more than 40 active co-workers working in this area. I would like to show you one video. I don't know how to run now. The explanation of Andalusia Hub. I don't know. Somebody must click there. The link, sorry. Yes, right. Thank you. Vale. Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to finally I'm going to change to Spanish to invite you. La idea, por lo tanto, es invitar a
I'd just like to invite members of the Committee of the Regions. We have moved this from 12 members to 25 at the coordinators meeting. It's now a seminar. It will be an opportunity to go to Andalusia Hub and to find out a little bit about what we're working on, because it's a real mixture of data, working with SMEs, to try and promote tourism as a key sector of the Andalusian economy. We're going to have this meeting in the first 3 months of 2020, sometime in March, maybe in April. We'll need to discuss the date. So we'd like you to come along, visit Andalusia, Marbella, Malaga, and see our experience when it comes to sustainable tourism and data and how the two are combined there. That was it, Chairman. Thank you very much to Mr. Cardenetti, and I hope we're going to be able to adopt this proposal. And once we've done that in the usual way, all the instructions will be sent by the Secretariat so that you can sign up. Obviously, we need to agree on the specific dates. There was a suggestion that it would take place at the beginning of the year. That's good when it comes to the resources available. And that also gives us time to prepare. And that will be a good start to the work of the future Commission, this kind of seminar in Spain. Okay, good. Is everybody happy with that? As was mentioned, invitations will be sent out and the Secretariat will be working on all the practical arrangements and the invitations and the like. So that's sorted out 4.8. So we've now dealt with the whole of point 4, which is the organisation of future work. And that takes us nicely on to the opinions, the presentation of the opinions. We've got Mr. Pedersen coming along for this. We touched on this when we talked about our work with the Commission and the WHO. This important work will continue during the next term of office, the next mandate. We now have an opportunity to hear from Mr. Pedersen on this. I'd also like to invite along Nick Beattie, Chair of the European Regional and Local Health Authorities, EUREGA, in the UK, and I'd also like to invite to the top table Caroline Hager, who is the team leader for cross-border healthcare at DG Santé. So I'd like to invite you to the top table, and then we'll have the presentation from the rapporteur, Mr. Pedersen.
No niin, kaikki ovat nyt.
Okay, so everybody's in situ at the top table. And we've got all the experts there with the rapporteur. Go ahead, rapporteur, and present your opinion.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I've been looking forward to be able to present this document to the NAT Commission. It's the implementation of healthcare cross-border. So the directive on the cross-border healthcare, it's been 6 years since the directive was implemented in member states, and 11 years ago we adopted our opinion on this directive. It was my pleasure and privilege to be rapporteur on that opinion. So I'm very happy that the EU Commission has contacted us and asked us to draw up a perspective opinion on the cross-border healthcare. And I hope today that we can have a good discussion based on this document. The final opinion will have to be adopted in July 2020. We're looking forward to the opinions from the regional hubs in order to send a strong message from the Committee of the Regions in order to improve the implementation. Now, patient mobility cross-border is a very important question. There was a Eurobarometer survey from 2018 indicating that 34% of citizens indicate healthcare as the most important for their region. In another Eurobarometer review, we also asked whether patients were willing to move cross-border to get healthcare. And there, a big majority said that they were willing to move across borders to get healthcare. And another part, about half, said they weren't willing to move. But of course, the top of the list of their importance would be cancer, for instance, and also dental health care is very important. Number 3, in fact, on the list of priority. Now, in Denmark, there's only 1% of EU population are those who often pass borders to get healthcare. So we are second on the list after France of citizens who use cross-border healthcare. It is an indication of that financial means is important, and it is also a reflection of the high price of Danish dental healthcare. So the young and people who know languages are willing to cross border to get healthcare. The older you get, the higher the willingness to be treated close to your home. And also, the older you get, the higher the need would be for healthcare. And it's not surprising that healthcare close to where you live is what gives you the most comfort. So it's a healthcare system which is close to citizens. It's that which is important. So cross-border healthcare is not a shortcut to a well-functioning health system. It should be seen as a supplement to national healthcare provisions in the case of very rare diseases or where it is very practical for patients to cross borders. The directive is quite relevant in a situation where the waiting time is too long in the national health system, where it would be natural to send patients across borders. So the directive is good as such. Implementation could be improved. There are a number of questions for patients as to continuity in the treatment and exchange of information between health professionals cross-border. And on top of that, you have also logistical consequences which could influence the cross-border treatment of patients. Of course, it's important for the implementation that health professionals and patients are well informed about the possibilities of getting health care cross-border and how to provide this information on the best basis would be different from country to country, but we should use the normal systems like home pages in national health systems. Now, it seems that it's better now, the information to patients is better. The EU Commission has said that there's been a good increase in 2015 in the information provided to citizens, and also pre-authorizations has also increased since 2015 across the board. In practice, it's only a very small part of EU citizens who utilize the possibilities offered by the directive. I think this is a good indication. It shows that member states' national systems function well for most of citizens. In my opinion, on cross-border healthcare, I'll be looking at legal, administrative, and legal changes which could influence the rights of patients to travel cross-border to get treatment. And we will respect the organization, the administration, the financing, and the provision of healthcare. It is, after all, a competence of member states, and we should look at all the tasks that national health systems should solve for citizens. I've noted that the EU Commission wish that even more citizens use cross-border healthcare, but I would say to that the number of healthcare across borders should not be an aim in itself. It could be useful for citizens in certain cases, but as a responsible politician in my own country, I would always work to utilize the national resource as best as possible. As you can see from my paper, I've also put a number of questions. There are 8 questions which we can discuss during our discussion. I hope our debate will be good, but I can say that I look very much forward to the discussion that we're going to have here. Thank you very much.
Thank you to the rapporteur. You've clearly done a lot of work on this, and it does have a real impact on citizens' ordinary lives on a day-to-day basis. Now, we're very lucky to have the chair of Eureka with us, Nick Beattie, and he will be the next speaker. We are delighted to have you here, and the floor is now yours, and after you we'll hear from the Commission representative. Nick Beattie, please.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, an apology. My voice doesn't normally sound like this. It arrived on the travel over. I hope it will survive. If it follows yesterday, there may be some strange squeaks and drops as it goes. Just adds intonation to the presentation. So thank you for the invitation to talk from the perspective of Eureka, a network of regional and local health authorities. So what I am bringing to this conversation and this discussion today is based on the real-life practical experiences of those organisations and those citizens that are dealing with the challenge of actually either consuming, using or delivering cross-border healthcare services. And for the past 12 months or so, the Eureka members and a wider group have been working through, under the auspices of the EU Health Policy Platform, on putting together a thematic network with a recommendation, a series of recommendations on health in cross-border regions. And for that, we're very grateful to the help that the European Commission has given in creating that. So we've been working with a number of stakeholders to tease out, what are the issues. Our rapporteur played out a number of the issues and a number of the challenges and barriers that are in place, but there are many challenges to be able to make this work practically. Like I said, in some respects, this cross-border healthcare is a slightly strange thing. When the initial directive came out, at a local regional level, there was huge concern. It was really a concern that you would either see a sudden rush of people from Wales to other parts of Europe to be able to consume healthcare. Wales is my home region within the UK, by the way, and that would incur a huge cost for our health authorities. Equally, we would be inundated with people flooding across from other parts of Europe to be able to move into NHS to take services and destabilise what in most countries are already quite fragile systems. We know that didn't happen. That is not the issue. The issue is not therefore also around finance. The money and the numbers involved in this are very small. So what we were starting to tease out as we went through these areas, particularly is that around 30% of our population live in border regions. This is about practicalities of operating in a local territory. Carsten mentioned this issue of cross-border care where you're going to seek treatment, say, from Wales to Belgium. It's not across an immediate border. It's just going to another country for orthopedic or bariatric surgery. It's a choice. You've researched it. The people doing that usually are well informed. They're even better informed, as we've said now, with the information available, but they're seeking for particular purposes. We also have those individuals who are seeking because they have a particular condition and they need to get to the expertise which is consolidated in a particular centre of excellence. But we also have large parts of the population where cross-border healthcare is simply about that practicality of the nearest service happens to be across a border. And I say simply with a slight condition on there, it is far from simple in many areas to actually access those services. We know many of the barriers that exist. They can be from language, but they're also around the records, the information. How do you move the information between those services? I'll survive. It can be around the follow-up treatment, going from one arena to another for treatment. If you go in for surgery, for an orthopedic surgeon procedure, who then does the follow-up, and how does that relate in terms of moving the information around? Moving between the different health systems in terms of, is it insurance-based or is it public-funded based? How do you manage that as a process? And we know that for some countries and regions, there is a pre-authorization process required for people to be able to move. So from the citizens, from the patient's perspective, there are barriers that are in place, but there are also examples where regions, countries, and territories have overcome those barriers, and there's some of the things that I will share with you today. But it's not just about that cross-border access for the patients, for the citizens. Delivering and planning health and care service delivery in territories is hugely challenging. Those of you that are here that are directly involved with that will know that it is also hugely costly. The cost of the health and social care budget in my region is more than 50% of the whole of the government's budget. So everything else, education, economic development, is less than half of what we spend in health and social care. So it's a really, really challenging and costly area. And we're all facing very similar challenges in terms of shifting needs from the population, from aging population, shifting expectations from individuals and from groups within the population. The impact of changes in drugs and in technology, meaning we're expected to do more, and particularly from public funded systems, we're expected to do that more with less and less money. So it's not an easy challenge to address. And there is something that in terms of cross-border planning, there's something that we can work to be more effective in terms of moving those forward. Some of the other challenges that sit underneath and underpin some of these areas, particularly in that immediate cross-border area, is seeing staff being able to move freely, professionals moving across the border into other institutions. So we need to see something around mutual recognition of qualifications. We have that in place, particularly works well for doctors and nurses, but many services are very fundamentally dependent on care assistance, particularly in social care, one of the major challenge areas. So is there something more we can do around making sure that where we are recognising qualifications, one, that system works well, because it doesn't work consistently everywhere, but the second is, can we make that more available and more accessible to different categories and groups of some of the employers? And we have, in some places, legal difficulties. There are examples in Lower Austria, for example, where actually the ambulance can't cross the border legally. So it can't go across with a blue light, even though they may be sitting just a kilometre over the border, they can't operate. So being able to undo some of those legal challenges, or to enable, or in some cases just find a fix, is part of what this is about. So there's a practicality around doing this. Two other points I think really to raise. We talk about cross-border healthcare, and the natural inclination is to think about it's a go across the border to the nearest hospital. The healthcare thinking is about a much wider consideration of the health system. It does include primary care, but it's also including social care. It's also including public health, health protection, health promotion. So there's a much broader thinking about how do we deliver and consider these services. And particularly in that public health space, we've talked for many years about being able to shift more of the resource into prevention and promotion rather than treatment of illness. We still struggle to meet that challenge in most countries and regions. And I think the one that is starting to shift in many areas is to see how that health system also operates within the local economy. It is not just a consumer of resource, it is a major player in most local economies. In many areas, it actually may be the largest employer. It spends a huge amount of money both in the local community and local economy and in a wider economy. So factoring in how do we do this cross-border in an economic sense in a geography and a territory is an important feature that some of the regions have been looking at. Costa mentioned that the health is a member state competency. I have a plea from a region. Yes, it may be a member state competency, but in most areas, it's actually delivered at sub-member state level. And that gives us great challenges. Within my country, in the UK, there are 4 different health systems. It's not a national health system. It is national in terms of consumer at the point of use, but in terms of how it's organised and how it's structured, there are different systems. And if you took a whole system look, you then have local authorities and other bodies involved. So taking a much more granular look about how we deliver those services is really, really important. That comes through particularly in information and data. Having analysis at member state level in this area actually doesn't help within the countries, doesn't help in regions and territories to be able to compare and move. So in terms of practically what can we do, there are some really good strong examples of being able to overcome how things operate in Lower Austria and Czechia. There's some clear examples of how we can overcome some of the reimbursement issues. This doesn't have to rely on cash or money flowing across borders. They are thinking about, can you put a basket of equivalencies? Okay, you do that amount for ours over on your side, we'll do a similar amount on our side over here. It doesn't need to have a legal and financial flow, it just needs to have a safe construct and an MOU in place. So there is something very much around practical, pragmatic approaches. There is also something around being able to learn and learn rapidly from others. The diversity of the regions does mean that we see very, very different solutions. One size fits all doesn't work at all. Almost every time it will need to be tailored. But that does not mean you need to start from square one every single time. Being able to steal with pride, to be able to take someone else's first example and use that as a baseline to be able to move forward allows us to accelerate. And for me, that is the key part of this. How do we move more quickly where it is something that we need to do? And I think involving more than just the usual stakeholders in terms of the institutions that are providing the services, but ensuring that actually we have practical engagement and involvement from our citizens and from our societal representatives. And there the Meuse-Rhine region has some excellent experience that I would commend to you in terms of being able to use citizen summits to get the input and to be able to discuss openly and practically how this can be moved forward and move forward effectively. I mentioned earlier about planning and planning of future resources. This, I think, is one of the fundamental areas in terms of some dimensions of cross-border healthcare. Investing in infrastructure is massively, massively expensive. Being able to do that beyond just your own local boundaries will have benefits, but that is really challenging. A lot of what we're talking about in this space is actually about trust. It's about developing trust at a political level, at an official level, at a financial and at a legal level. And building trust takes time, particularly if you're against a context where that trust doesn't exist or it was quite a negative scenario. So it takes time to move this. So there's something about managing expectations about how far and how fast we can move. We've touched, I think, on the issue around sharing data and sharing information. It is fundamentally important from the level of being able to share the record on the individual so we can ensure that safe care is being delivered across these borders. But it's also important in terms of management and planning and assessment information, that aggregated information, being able to have that available at the right level of granularity, which is at regional or sub-regional level, not at member state level. It complements member state, but it needs to go one level lower. So they were just some very fast thoughts of some of the things that we need to be able to address. Finally, I would just raise to you, we have put this together, as we said, as a thematic network response. It is a document on the Euriga website. I commend it to you. It expands on a number of the points that I've raised with you today. If you feel it's appropriate, we would be more than welcoming if you were to endorse that as a thematic network document as well. Thank you, Chair.
Kiitoksia, Nick. Ja
Thank you very much, Nick. I'd now like to give the floor to the representative of the European Commission. Go ahead.
Right. Good morning, everyone. And first of all, thank you very much indeed to the Committee of Regions for accepting the Commission's request to draft an outlook opinion on the directive on the application of patient rights in cross-border healthcare. We're very delighted that we have Mr. Peterson has been nominated as the rapporteur, as it's always, obviously very, very useful to have somebody who already has experience and can look back as to how things have developed since the directive was adopted in 2011. And obviously we stand ready for any issues of clarification or any questions that you have. What I thought I would do, and I thought you'd find it useful, is just to briefly look at what the directive is about and what we mean when we talk about cross-border healthcare in the legal sense. I mean, both Nick and Mr. Peterson talked about how cross-border healthcare is the exception rather than the rule, of course, because most people would like and prefer to receive healthcare close to their family and close to their own doctors and hospitals. However, nonetheless, it's important that patients do have the right to seek healthcare in another member state because the most appropriate treatment may be across the border. Now, there are two EU laws that give you the freedom to access healthcare in another country. First of all, you have the coordination of social security schemes that have been in place really since the 1970s, but most recently revised in 2004 and 2009. Now, under the social security regulations, you're entitled to have treatment abroad as though you were insured under the social security system of where you get your treatment. So you provide your European health insurance card, which I hope you all are aware of, no need to pay any costs up front, and then the health insurance providers take care of the reimbursement of the treatment. Now, the directive is the second legal route, and this is different in that the role of the directive is to clarify the rights to cross-border healthcare stemming from, hang on, I'll just go one. How do I get this now? Like that? All right, okay, thanks, yeah. So with regards to it's missing. Ah, there. Okay, I see. All right, so stemming from Court of Justice case law, so it complements the EU regulations on social security. And I just want to add the social security regulations mainly focus on emergency care, whereas the directive's main purpose is for planned treatment in another country. Now, the difference here is that the patients can not only choose a healthcare provider abroad, but they can choose public or private healthcare providers. In addition, a big difference is that in the case of the directive, patients actually have to pay for their costs up front and then seek reimbursement for the treatment in the member state of where they are insured. So that's a very big difference between the regulation and the directive. Prior authorization, as Mr. Peterson already said, is acceptable, but only in specific circumstances, and I'll come back to that. Now, one of the core questions for anyone seeking healthcare in another country is, of course, how much they're going to pay. And as I said, in the case of the directive, patients have to pay upfront. And I think this is really one of the key weaknesses of the directive. But this is what was decided when it was adopted. Now, let's see what happens. So it harmonizes minimum patient rights. It furthers cooperation between member states, and it ensures information to patients. And I just want to go through each of those in turn. Information to patients. Well, the directive established national contact points in each country. These are based either in the national health ministries or the national insurance bodies. It was up to the member state to decide where to locate them. And it's their task to provide information to patients. Of course, you also have healthcare providers who to whom it also falls to provide information to patients on any matter regarding their health care. Now, we are working with member states to improve information to patients, as we know from surveys that very few people actually are well informed about their rights to healthcare abroad, and member states certainly need to do more to publicize patient rights using clear information. So it's about making people aware of their rights. It's not about promoting the mobility or encouraging patients to seek healthcare in another member state. Of course, it's always in the interest of patients to have that healthcare close at home. What we published this year on our website is a manual for patients. At the moment, it's only in English, but it will be available before the end of the year in all EU languages, and it includes frequently asked questions that patients may have if they're seeking treatment in another country, and it also clarifies the difference between the regulation and the directive. And then finally, an important part of the directive is this cooperation between health systems, where the directive led to the establishment of the so-called ERNs, the European Reference Networks for patients with rare diseases. There are 24 of these networks, which bring together highly specialized medical professionals to offer their expertise to diagnose and treat patients with rare diseases. However, the patient doesn't travel. It's always a very important point to make. All consultations take place through a virtual consultation platform. And then we have e-health. The Commission is working with member states to develop an e-health digital infrastructure so that e-health systems are interoperable to ensure the exchange of e-prescriptions and patient summaries. So this is a short patient record between countries. And since its launch in 2019, more than 4,000 prescriptions have been exchanged between Finland and Estonia, and more member states are joining this exchange each year. And finally, you have the health technology assessment, which has established European cooperation to assess health technologies. These are medicinal products, medical equipment, treatment methods, rehabilitation, and prevention methods. However, this part of the directive has now become part of a separate proposal. Patient flows, I thought this would certainly be of interest to you. Now, according to our latest data report on patient mobility in the EU, it's 2017 data, around 200,000 patients a year seek healthcare in another member state under the directive. Now, the data is not perfect because, unfortunately, a number of countries do not distinguish between cross-border healthcare reimbursement under the directive and cross-border healthcare reimbursements under the Social Security regulations, so under the European Health Insurance Card. So we're working with member states to try and improve this situation. But nonetheless, we have some, well, let me just, sorry, I was just going to summarize what the figures are. So under the Social Security scheme, there's around 2 million cases a year, necessary unplanned healthcare when people have skiing accidents or contract illness while they're in another country. And then we have around 55,000 cases of planned healthcare under the regulations a year. And we mustn't forget that more than 1 million people live outside their member state and therefore are seeking healthcare every year in another country, my husband included. So regarding the directive then, we have around 200,000 reimbursements a year, which is, you know, very, very few. And 3,500 are with the prior authorization. Prior authorization, by the way, patients have to seek prior authorization when there's an overnight stay in hospital or when it involves highly costly and highly specialized equipment. Those are the criteria for needing to seek prior consent. So the trends are that the majority of patient flows are, unsurprisingly, between neighboring countries sharing borders and language, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. Cross-border healthcare is particularly important in border regions where people cross borders, you know this. And as you can see, France reports the highest number of outgoing patients, and Spain reports the highest number of incoming patients. Now, France is one of those countries which doesn't distinguish its data between the regulations and the directive, unfortunately. And Spain is a destination, of course, of many French, and therefore I think these figures are slightly skewed as a result. But this is something we're really taking very, very seriously indeed to get a better handle on the figures. But I think overall, as Mr. Peterson already said, you know, mobility is very low, and this shouldn't be seen as a negative. It's more that national health systems are mainly provide the healthcare to citizens. Now, just to conclude then on border regions, you know this, 40% of the EU territory is regional, 30% of the population, 40% of EU GDP, but we need to do a heck of a lot more to remove the complex, long and costly administrative systems and make it easier for citizens in the border regions. Now, EU activities on healthcare relevant to border regions, this is just specifically to DG Sante. Of course, DG Regio, as you know, provides a huge amount of funding to support activities in the borders. But regarding DG Sante, then, our investment has mainly been in terms of conferences and studies. Most recently, a study on cross-border healthcare Corporation, published in 2018, where we mapped cross-border healthcare projects in the EU, which I think the committee may find of interest. There's also a toolbox on how to go about setting up a cross-border healthcare project as well. Very briefly, our analysis showed, or the contractor's analysis showed, that half of the projects relate to knowledge sharing and management. Around a quarter of them involve patients moving across borders, 12% involve staff exchange and training, and only 5% involved projects around high-cost capital investments and emergency care. So where do we stand then now? So there's been quite a bit of progress since the directive was transposed in 2013, although the majority of member states did this by 2015, so we're only looking at 4 years, really, in terms of giving patients this right to choice of healthcare in another EU country. However, the challenges remain. Few patients are aware of the rights, need to do a lot more on the patient information, a lot more work, as Nick pointed out, on reducing administrative burdens. Considerable efforts are being invested in the digitization healthcare to make it much easier to have this cross-border cooperation using e-health and exchange of prescriptions and patient summaries. And there's a high added value on EU actions in the area of rare diseases. So we have recently seen a whole range of reports on the directive's implementation, starting with the Commission's own report last September, followed by the European Parliament earlier this year, and finally by the European Court of Auditors in June, which did a very extensive report and audit on how the Commission was managing and overseeing the implementation of the directive. So it was an audit of the European Commission, not of the member states. And the priorities for improvements that were identified by all these reports were indeed looking again at the systems of reimbursement, the use of prior authorization for planned treatment. Is it really being used only for highly cost-intensive and specialized equipment? What are the administrative obstacles? Is there overcharging of incoming patients by member states? And what we can do to improve information to patients? And, you know, we really see the Committee of Regions playing a really important role in helping raise the awareness and feeding back on the problems on implementation and practice, on sharing with us any good practices you pick up on as a result of the survey, because we need to work together to find out how this directive works in practice. You know, me and my team are not going to know just on the basis of checking the legislation, which is something we do every day, and obviously we work with the member states. But we really do hope that your opinion, the work that you're doing, is going to shed some further light on what the impact of this directive is. Thank you very much.
Kiitoksia komissio.
Thank you very much to the Commission representative, and thank you once again for reinforcing and stressing the Commission's support for COR involvement in these issues. And we do hope that we'll be able to contribute in the future and contribute to better lawmaking and improving practices in this field of health. So who would like the floor on this? Some people have already asked for it. Ilpo first, please. With a microphone.
Anteeksi, mikrofoni ei ollut.
I do apologise, says Mr. Ilmoinen. President, experts, representatives. Now, I'm Ilpo Heiman and I'm from Finland, and you were talking about the prescription centre shared between Finland and Estonia, that you'd have a prescription issued in one country that you could have dispensed in another. Now, thinking about this from the point of view of the future and the areas in which the EU could provide added value, in how this could benefit residents of the EU. Now, the first point is a purely economic one. Now, the situation is such that we've got very different solutions in the EU as to how you can offer social care and health care in different member states, and sometimes it varies within individual member states. Let me give you an example that doesn't come from the EU. It comes from South Korea, actually. There's you actually have hospitals set up in shopping centres. And this is a new approach. You've got the private sector very much involved. You have the operation that takes place in this hospital, in the operating theatre, but then it's up to the patient what sort of accommodation they organise for themselves. The hospital just deals with the actual procedure. So this is one approach involving the private sector, SMEs, and offering physiotherapy, for example. And it doesn't necessarily always mean that people have to pay more, or that it, puts pressure on healthcare professionals. You can actually, if you so desire, cooperate with the private sector. And I also think it's very important that we really focus on the citizen here. It's really important to take into account the citizens' perspective if we're wanting to increase choice, freedom of choice in the EU. I think we need some kind of common way of gauging, some sort of meter system to allow you to compare things across hospitals. I don't know, maybe someone with a broken hip. We also know that we are living in an ageing society here in the European Union, and we know that the fact that we're an ageing society pushes up costs of treating different diseases and conditions that come with age. It pushes up public expenditure. Now, if you have a hip replacement, for example, we're going to need more and more of those. So that's a sort of a case study. So maybe we could have some way of measuring the quality of that care. Whether it's a private sector provider or a public sector provider, the same yardstick should apply to both. In terms of quality, you could think about what complications have been experienced over the course of a year. How often had you needed to repeat the operation? What kind of infections people had got? And what about rehabilitation? How had that gone? So you could include physiotherapy. It would be more than just the hip replacement operation in itself. So we'd have common measures, common indicators, and that would give patients, citizens the opportunity to compare. You might have to wait 6 months for the operation in your own country. In the neighbouring country, you might pay the same amount, or maybe, I don't know, a little bit more, but you might get the operation the following week. So I think this kind of information, if it were available, might actually increase interest amongst citizens, and it might improve quality. And we also need to think about savings. The longer people are outside of the world of work while they're waiting for an operation, then they're not paying tax through work in the same way if they're on the sick, and then it might take them longer to get back to work. You know, sometimes within a given country, patients get sent from one city to another, one hospital to another domestically. But maybe you could send people to a hospital in another country. Things could happen more quickly. It might actually make more sense for the treatment to be carried out somewhere else than in the home member state. And I think that in practical terms, it might make sense to do that. And you could only do that if you had these common indicators and yardsticks I was talking about. Obviously, you need to be sure that you looked after people's data. You need proper data protection, and obviously you need the citizen to be happy about this. We've got this prescription system between Finland and Estonia. These you know, this information goes from one country to another electronically, so why shouldn't patient information also flow electronically? You know, that should be possible if you make that decision. So I think the customer, as it were, the citizen, has to be right at the heart of whatever you do here. And I think we ought to be able to come up with something which is beneficial, more beneficial to countries if we take a more holistic view of all this. And maybe we could not just look to the hospital in the neighbouring town, but also to a hospital in a neighbouring country. And that might be a way of, I don't know, increasing jobs in the healthcare sector across Europe. And the situation in Finland is such that we have a shortage of doctors. So actually, that might help the situation in respect of some specialities, some operations, if we could send people elsewhere. And there might actually be a surplus of staff and expertise in other areas. So having exchanges on that, I think, would be good. And I think we could do this if we had these common yardsticks, and it would actually increase the added value that the EU gives to its citizens, and also, you know, make an overall improvement to the situation in the regions as well. Thank you very much, Ilpo. Perhaps I could ask people to keep their interventions short and sweet, please. Jean-Luc is next. Go ahead.
Please use the microphone.
Thank you. Dank u, meneer de voorzitter. Ik zou graag
microphone, please, for the speaker.
omschrijven. Het eerste betreft het meer ideologische.
Well, firstly, on the more ideological side, I think that we all agree that every European citizen or patient has the right to be treated in the best possible way, as close as possible to home. And I think that is the primary principle, and also in their own language, if possible. Studies have shown that 30% of the wrong diagnoses that have been made in healthcare happen through a lack of understanding of the language concerned. And I think, therefore, that's an important point. Another point is, I've said that every patient, every citizen has the right, and that's an important social element as well. Now, of course, you can very few people can afford medical tourism. That's just the happy few, in fact. And there are many people who are in need and face difficulties when it comes to medical reimbursements, because we have different systems for reimbursement, and sooner or later we'll need to draw up a list of what we wish at EU level to support. And I think that is going to be a very important element of cross-border healthcare provision. Now, another element is purely commercial, and this has been said by previous colleagues as well. It's true that healthcare has a commercial aspect to it, and that's not something that we should turn a blind eye to. That means that every country has a healthcare organization in each of our member states, and we know that in some it is run in a more optimal way than in others. Now, we have very long waiting lists in some member states for some forms of care, and the question is, to what extent are member states actually living up to their responsibilities? It's all very well saying we don't have enough doctors. I think it would be better to say we're going to make an effort to have more doctors in our own countries and to make sure that we're training enough medical students in our own member states. Now, people have been talking about 2% cross-border healthcare, but in some countries, people are saying, well, you know, the waiting lists are too long in our country, so we'll go across the border. And I do think that member states shouldn't use that phenomenon to get out of their own responsibilities. And so I think we need to pay attention to that.
Kiitos, Jean-Luc.
Thank you, Jean-Luc. Mr. Marquis, please.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you to the rapporteur and everybody who has cooperated in drawing up this important opinion. I think that paying attention to cross-border healthcare is something that will help the population interested in this subject to pay more attention to it. Now, I'd like to make a contribution and answer questions number 1 and 2. Above all, I'd like to underline our experience of cross-border healthcare with the Hospital of Susa and Briançon between France and Italy. We're paying a lot of, well, the local authorities, the regional authorities, and my border region is paying a lot of attention to this experiment. We are creating public services at the border, and the ESPON report has shown that perhaps not all of the things available are being made use of. In answer to question 2, I think we need to take account of the different ways in which health services are organised in the different countries. To come back to Briançon and Susa, we are carrying out cooperation on the basis of different models, in fact. In Italy, we have a health system which is a universal model. The structures and the human resources are organised more centrally. In France, it's a state service. It's based on the Bismarck service and it's based on an insurance system as well. So I think that it is possible to make major progress when it comes to cross-border healthcare provision, even when you have these different systems in place. You need political will for this, but you need economic and legal instruments of an innovative nature. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marquis. Ms. Rees, next, please.
Vielen Dank. Ich habe meinen Namen nicht verstanden.
Sorry, I didn't understand my name. I come from a border region, and as the previous speaker has said, it's an Interreg project, it's cross-border. That's our case as well. There are heart patients. We have Unison and Forbach, which are working together. And in the Saarland, this works very well because the doctors are bilingual and the nurses as well. And so there's cross-border exchanges of healthcare workers, doctors and nurses. So this is well accepted. Unfortunately, it's an Interreg programme, and it has to be confirmed at some point, and money is lacking. But the major problem was the prior authorization for this. As the rapporteur said in his questions, the health insurance funds have said that they're prepared to treat these patients across border, even if there's no prior authorization for this. And perhaps in border regions, this prior authorization could be agreed with the funds. And then there's the national health card as well. In Germany, all of those who are legally insured can have the European health card on their national health card. I don't know how it works in other countries. Perhaps that idea could be taken up if it's not the case elsewhere, because it's really practical. And we have tourism from France to Germany when people are pregnant, because we have a very good place on the border for giving birth. It seems to make sense for women to remain in their own country, but gradually we're seeing this happening. Often there were problems of insurance and people were taken out of the ambulances at the border, but now this cooperation is working better, and I think it's sensible if we take away the borders when it comes to healthcare in these areas.
Thank you very much. The COR Health Group Chairman, Ms. Sagredeos, next, please.
Tack så mycket.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that what is a problem, and now I'm addressing the European Commission, is that I don't think that we have sufficient clear laws and rules for cross-border healthcare. Now, perhaps I can say that in the future, the Commission ought to make funds available in order to stimulate more cross-border activities and work in the future. Now, of course, it's important for us to find these good examples, and we've heard a number of examples of where it can go wrong, but also some good examples of when things work well. Now, the Commission has asked me to look out for good examples where cross-border healthcare is working well. Now, one problem we've noticed in Sweden is that we noticed that healthcare is more expensive in other countries than it would be if you had been treated back home. So price is also something you would need to discuss about different forms of healthcare. Thank you.
Kiitos Birgitta. Ja
Thank you, Birgitta. You have a key role in this area in the Committee of the Regions. You've done an awful lot of work around the whole issue of healthcare. So I do hope that you can actually benefit from this work on the opinion. I've got various people that are asking for the floor, and then we'll draw a line under the discussion. We don't have any amendments to vote on today. We have to keep an eye on the clock, however. We've got lunch at some stage, so three speakers left. Mr. Taronet, please.
Sí, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is Mr. Cardenete Flores. Now, if I can just focus on question 8, what can be done to ensure that the system of prior authorization is deemed to be absolutely essential, does not become an unnecessary administrative barrier to cross-border healthcare. Now, thinking about Andalusia and the whole issue of universal healthcare, there's a border with Portugal, that's not a big issue, but there's also a border with the north of Africa. There can be issues with, and not just with illegal immigration, but also people that come to work in Andalusia and that need treatment. I'm thinking about people with cancer, women who are pregnant and that need care. Now in 2020, there could be 200,000 people. We could be talking about €1 billion here of healthcare, and obviously there's a private component to this, but a lot of it ends up being funded out of the public purse, and this is it's not just the physical border either. In Malaga, there are people that come for holidays, foreigners, people come for, hip replacements. I'm thinking about older people, and it is a burden, and we have to think about how to proceed. Thank you. Thank you for that input. Anthony Buchanan next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Although, colleagues, in the first instance this might seem to be a slightly less important issue due to the small number of patients accessing healthcare in another EU member state, I can certainly say from experience that the cross-border directive is an extremely important element of the EU freedom of movement. And when your rights and freedoms, including the ability to access healthcare elsewhere in the EU, are under threat, especially if you're being dragged out against your will, then it really brings home how privileged we are in Europe to have this option available to us. There are different healthcare systems, as Nick alluded to, that make up the countries, that make up the UK. And in Scotland, the healthcare provision is devolved to the Scottish Government. It's a Scottish competence, and therefore in 2013 the Scottish Government transposed this directive into our own domestic regulations. Such is our commitment to retain this ability to access healthcare that the Scottish Government has introduced legislation to ensure an effective mechanism to maintain cross-border healthcare arrangements in appropriate circumstances if the UK leaves the EU without a deal. And of course, in observing the subsidiarity principle, it's important for our overall success of EU policy making, and a key reason as to why we are here. Proportionality is also an important principle. But as we've heard earlier, there is a need for continued European cooperation and a clear role for the COR and local and regional authorities within that in cross-border healthcare. And a simple example would be the exchanging of practices on the public health measures at an EU level. But an issue that concerns me is a growing issue, and it's the issue of the growing health inequalities, which may affect many, and which does affect many member states. And in order to address this, we require a shift in the focus of resources from crisis management to the consequences of poverty, to preventing it and to tackling it in the root causes of many of those health issues. And that's not something that will happen if it's continually put out to the private sector. And that's a very real threat that I have, and the NHS in Scotland has. There is a distinctive threat for the privatisation of many of our services. And that will undermine the issues that we all hold dear, which are tackling inequality and poverty. And so, colleagues, it requires this holistic cross-sectoral approach within the regional and local authorities, and we are uniquely placed in order to ensure that we lead on those areas. The role of public health promotion in addressing health inequalities should, in my view, be included in all of our opinions and all of our health matters. Thank you.
Kiitoksia.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wallendorf, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank the Commission in particular for asking us for our opinion, and I'd like to congratulate Mrs. Hager on the excellence of her presentation. I'd like to talk about my experience. I am the mayor of Gièvech, and I am on the border with Belgium, the border between Belgium and France, and the closest hospital is Dinan in Belgium. For an equivalent hospital in France, we need to travel 60 kilometres. We're a town of 10,000, and that's why we've tried to set up a very original initiative which goes beyond the directive and allows French and Belgian patients to get treatment in the best placed hospital in their view without needing prior authorization. Thank you for asking for our opinion on this, Commission, because as people on the spot, we're in the best position to understand the needs of our population. And I'd like to draw the attention of the rapporteur and the Commission to 3 points which seem to me to be essential here for the well-being of our citizens. First of all, expenses, costs. We have Social Security in France. As my colleague said earlier on, it's a state organisation, but there are also private mutual funds which deal with the additional costs incurred by the patient. In the case of concern to us, Social Security does finance reimbursements without the patient having advanced any money, and that's the original feature of our system. But unfortunately for the mutual funds, the money has to be advanced by the patient and then refunded in not always the best conditions. In France, there are lots and lots of different mutual funds. Some of them recognise the directive, some recognise the convention we signed, organised zone to cross-border healthcare, as it's called. And then along the France-Belgian border from the North Sea down to Luxembourg, some patients don't manage to get their costs covered, even when they're in hospital. I think if something could be done to help us, that would be really helping the local population. And then the second subject relates to doctors in our neighbouring areas. In my administration, we have fewer and fewer specialist doctors. There are a lot of specialist Belgian doctors who could come over and provide consultations in our area. We've managed to set up a special system under Interreg 5, and I'd like to thank the Regio directive for dealing with subjects like this. But unfortunately, Belgian practitioners are perfectly competent. They speak perfect French, but they have lots of difficulty in getting approval from the French Order of Doctors to come into our country and practice here. So if the directive could be modified, amended to make sure that these administrative hiccups or obstacles could be sidelined, that would be really helpful. I think the users of the services would be very satisfied if that were the case. And I'll conclude with a third subject which we need to mention when we talk about health as well. When we get care abroad, sometimes we die. And in those conditions, the return of bodies from Belgium to France or France to Belgium, 20 kilometres or so, is very problematic. It's easier to have a body sent home from Marseille, 1,000 kilometres away. It's easier to do that than to have a body sent back to Dinan, 20 kilometres. And if you could address that issue as well, we'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Kiitos, herra Wallendorf.
Thank you, Mr. Wallendorf. And then the last speaker on this, Ms. Balas-Torres.
Muchas gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I would just like to mention something that my Spanish colleague said, who It was a supplement for Mr. Cardenetti. I think we do have to distinguish two issues. There's one thing which is what we do to improve integration in Europe. Certainly when it comes to cross-border healthcare, we've got regions, Galicia, Andalusia, Extremadura, Castilla-León. And so obviously cross-border cooperation with Portugal is part of our DNA. So we've been doing this treatment, fighting cancer. You know, there are some Portuguese women who can come to Extremadura and Andalusia for care because it's a lot closer. So we do have to improve the system so that we can achieve our objectives. But there is one word which shocked me somewhat when we were talking about borders and the external borders of the EU. And I know that's not what we're talking about today, but I do want to say something about it. People come to Spain to work from outside the EU. They come to work, and while they're working, they develop cancer. I don't really think you can say that they've come to exploit Andalusian healthcare. I think we have to base what we're doing on solidarity above all. Now, obviously, you have to find a mechanism for this, and this is one of the big objectives that the Commission will be pursuing in its next term of office, and we do have to try and work on it here, the Committee of the Regions and also the European Parliament. But let's not forget the word solidarity when we're talking about the European Union. Thank you. So we got a lot of steer there for the Commission. The Commission asked for some input, and members have expressed all sorts of views, expressing the particular features of their own regions. So let's round off this general discussion now, and I'd now like to give the floor back to the rapporteur. The rapporteur now has an opportunity to address the questions raised, and I'd like to thank the Commission representative for coming along. I hope you've had a lot of useful input to your own work. I'd also like to thank the representative of Eurega. We've worked with you in the past. I'm sorry that we can't give you two the floor back again, but we listened to you, you've listened to us, and I'll give the floor to the rapporteur, and then we'll move on. And I do hope that, rapporteur, you got a lot of useful input for your future work.
Ja, tak for det. Well, thank you very much, President. I've heard a lot of examples, a lot of good examples in relation to the directive, but also I've heard about the complications and the barriers. I'm not going to comment on each and every intervention. I can just assure you that I've noted everything down. And we'll try and group the comments and perhaps propose improvements of the legislation. My own region is a border region, in fact, bordering to Schleswig-Holstein in Germany, in the south of Denmark. We have a very good cooperation. We don't talk about this directive. We simply cooperate across the border. If somebody falls ill close to the border, where it is quicker to go to Kiel and the hospital there, we'll do that. And if we need an ambulance north of the border and the first available is a German ambulance, it will come. So that's agreements that we've made, bilateral agreements, which is possible. And I know that a lot of German regions, they have also agreements with the French side of the border. But if we look at the directive, I've heard a lot about problems and barriers, complications. Obviously, we will try and look at that and see how we can propose to improve the situation. We cannot solve, of course, that is not our competence. But thank you very much for a lot of food for thought. We have a lot of time ahead of us also, luckily. So I think that I'll just say this today.
Kiitoksia esittelijä.
Thank you very much to the rapporteur, and I do hope that members will cooperate very well and that you'll make your views known to the rapporteur. As he was saying, you've got plenty of time. Thank you once again to the rapporteur and to our guests. And then the work on this will continue next year. Thank you. And let's now round off on this item, and we can move on. We'll have a new set of speakers here at the top table. We'll be talking about stepping up EU action to protect and restore the world's forests. Our rapporteur is Marco Dus. So I'd like to invite the rapporteur and his expert to come to the top table, and also Ms. Argiro Zerva from DG Environment at the Commission. And then we also have the Science Director from Chester Zoo, the Sustainable Palm Oil Cities Project. That's Dr. Simon Dowell. So please make your way up to the top table, and once everybody's in position, we will resume.
Kiitoksia. Esittelijä.
Thank you. We'll give the floor first to the rapporteur on this forest-related topic, and then Mr. Weinmeister, Vice Chairman. I don't know if you would mind coming up to the top table and chairing the meeting for 15 minutes. I unfortunately have to leave the meeting briefly. But for now, let's hear from the rapporteur, Mr. Dus.
Bene, grazie Presidente, gentili colleghi.
Thank you, Chairman. Colleagues, it's a real pleasure for me to be able to present this important working document on one of the silent but emerging topics, that of deforestation. Public opinion has peaks of attention when it comes to this subject. It's one of the emotional subjects, deforestation, which attracts public opinion. Recently, we saw the forests in Siberia and now in the Amazon catching fire. But perhaps I can give you the background and the importance of this. Forests are 30% of the continental mass in the world, 80% of biodiversity, and 30 million people, 60 million natives. So the figures speak for themselves and say how much of a priority this is for the European Union, how important it is to look at this subject. The European Union has 5% of the world forest area. Much of this is used for wood, 42% for energy, 24% is for sawmills, and then you have panels production. The main countries which have forests are Sweden, Finland, Spain, France, Germany, Poland. 2/3 of the total forest area in Europe, that is. So I wanted to give you these figures because I think it's important to understand the size of the problem and the size of the opportunity facing us. This opinion is a working document which we have left open so that everybody, all of the members, can give their contribution to it. At the end of our opinion, At the end of our working document, you will find 7 questions, fundamentally, and we would like you to answer those so that you can make a contribution on the subject. Let me try to summarise so that we don't spend too much time on this. Let me talk about the main points we wanted to include in our document. First of all, we have tried to put the consumer at the centre of the policy as we develop and promote effective certification schemes. But we also wanted to look at improvements in communication and the promotion of sustainable and deforestation-free products. We wanted to improve the dissemination and communication of actions made by the EC in this sector, improve the collaboration with tropical countries and promote the local education on environmental issues, and to encourage connections with ongoing projects and initiatives related to the creation of urban forests and ecological corridors at member state level. And of course, we wanted to focus on the matter of biodiversity. Forests preserve 80% of existing biodiversity, as I said earlier. In the working document, we have divided up the document into these different areas to make them more explicit. I'll just rush through these things. First of all, looking at the consumer and having the consumer at the centre of the policy here, developing certification schemes which are efficient here. We felt that there should be a specific EU certification scheme for deforestation-free products, integrating the certificates already available. But there's also the need to promote the EU certification scheme for deforestation-free products. And we felt it was necessary to draw up EU guidelines explaining the procedure for obtaining the certification, taking account of certain aspects. You can see the slides coming up here, and here we've tried to summarise the contents of the working document. Some aspects of promotion and certification are to make sure there's sustainable forest management, to have criteria to assess deforestation-free aspects, and to have forest management based on reduced use of natural resources and chemical substances and energy, and promotion of products with limited transport footprint, and life cycle assessments of products to quantify their environmental impact and to allow the comparison of their environmental performance. Then we have focused on certification schemes, of course, because we feel these need to be implemented further and they need further examination in the document. As I said at the outset, communication and promotion of sustainable and deforestation-free products is very important here. We need to have marketing of deforestation-free products. We need to look at that and promote that. And the Commission should improve communication and promotion of sustainable products from deforestation-free sources. We need to have a database information system to list all of these products, and we need to look at products that are marketed and where they come from. And that's the point we make in the opinion for the Commission. When it comes to communication as well, there are other aspects, other actions that the Commission could help to finance to improve communication first and foremost. Communication is an important subject for our Commission. Often we write about this in our opinions. We often talk about communicating better at European level and at local level. And I think it's important to find some way of talking about this in our document too. And then we've talked about improving cooperation with tropical countries and promoting environmental awareness at local level. It's not easy to do this. It's a long-term effort, very long-term in fact, but it's vital if we are going to be effective at local level and prevent deforestation. Then another point relates to encouraging initiatives and projects which are underway relating to the creation of urban forests and ecological corridors at member state level. Apart from aiming high, this opinion wants to look at urban forests, ecological corridors in the individual member states. And as we've seen, we have very important forests in many of our member states, and we need to work throughout the whole social urban development system. And then biodiversity, 80% of biodiversity is in forests. This is a key topic to take account of. There are excellent opinions on the subject, which have been drawn up by the Commission, and they need to be referred to in this opinion too. At the end of our working document, you will find a number of questions. I'd ask you to reply to them on the basis of your interests and competence, and that will help us to complete this opinion. Thank you.
Ja, herzlichen Dank. Grazie mille.
Thank you very much to the rapporteur for that statement. And now we're going to have a statement from Agero Seva from DG Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me the opportunity to be here and present the Commission communication on stepping up EU action to protect and restore the world's forests. I will start. Sorry. Sorry, I cannot see the whole slide. Okay. I'm sorry, there's a problem with the way the slides show. I was going to start with presenting some positive information. The EU forest might be a small percentage in the world, as Marco mentioned, but they cover 43% of the European Union's land, and from 1999 to 2015, forest cover increased by an area the size of Greece. However, the situation is not as good in the rest of the world, and forests are in serious danger from deforestation and forest degradation. And between 1990 and 2016, an area of 1.3 million square kilometers of forest has been lost. And the primary forests are in particular risk. The EU has already put in place a variety of regulatory and non-regulatory actions to deal with this problem. I could mention as an example the EU timber regulation that prohibits placing on the EU market of illegally harvested timber and timbers derived from such and timber products derived from such timber. So why does this matter to protect the forests of the world? First of all, forests host 80% of the terrestrial biodiversity, and approximately 1.6 billion of people depend on forests for their livelihoods. They are indispensable for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. They contribute almost to the implementation of all Sustainable Development Goals. They contribute to the Paris Agreement to mitigate climate change, and also to the Convention of Biological Diversity. And 12% of all greenhouse gas emissions come from land use change, and mostly due to deforestation. There are many drivers of deforestation and forest degradation, direct ones and indirect ones. The single most important driver is the expansion of agricultural land that accounts for approximately 80% of deforestation at global level. Other direct drivers include urban expansion, mining, infrastructure development, and we have many indirect drivers such as weak policies and enforcement, unclear land tenure and rights, illegal activities, and etc. What is the role of the EU in this global problem? While most commodities associated with deforestation and forest degradation are consumed at local or regional level, the EU imports products such as palm oil, meat, soy, cocoa, maize, etc., including in the form of processed products or services. When looking at deforestation embodied in total final consumption, the EU consumption represents around 10% of the global share. So we are part of the problem, but we can also be part of the solution, as we are a key player and we share a global responsibility. So in July this summer, the Commission adopted a communication on stepping up EU action to protect and restore the world's forest. The objective is to propose ways to step up EU action to protect the world's forests, in particular primary forests, and regenerate forests in a sustainable and responsible way. In preparing this communication, the Commission consulted widely with stakeholders, including through two conferences that took place in 2014 and 2017. We conducted an open public consultation in 2019 and also took into account several studies. Fighting deforestation is a complex challenge, and there is no one-size-fits-all solution, and solutions need to be specific to each country and region. The communication puts forward actions around 5 priorities, with the two objectives, as I previously mentioned, to protect existing forests, particularly primary forests, and to significantly increase sustainable biodiverse forest coverage worldwide. The communication is building on existing policies such as the FLECT Action Plan, and recognize that a global problem needs global solution. The EU cannot act alone, and rather action should be based on a strong partnership approach, close cooperation with producers, but also consumer countries, as well as with the business and civil society. Stepping up EU action is also in line with the EU objective to halt global forest cover loss by 2030, and will contribute to existing international commitments. And it also responds to the calls of the European Parliament, the Council, stakeholders from private and public sectors. You may see the 5 priorities in this slide, but I will skip it because I will go through each priority and also mention the key actions. So the first priority is about reducing the EU consumption footprint on land and encourage the consumption of products from deforestation-free supply chains in the EU. Among the key actions of this priority is the commitment by the Commission to assess additional demand-side regulatory and non-regulatory measures to minimize the risk of deforestation and forest degradation associated with commodity imports in the EU. We are dealing with complex and diverse supply chains, and we need to assess all possible options during this assessment. Of course, we will take into account existing experiences, such as the implementation of the EU timber regulation and also the FLECT action plan. And of course, we will take account the views and inputs from stakeholders. Among the key actions is also the establishment of a platform for multi-stakeholders and member states dialogue. We are working currently on this to have it set up, and we are planning to launch a call for application to make it as inclusive and balanced as possible. The second priority is about working with producer countries in partnership in order to reduce pressure on forests and to deforest-proof EU development cooperation. This priority builds on a long-lasting commitment to support partner countries to develop sustainable agriculture and to promote sustainable forest management. Since 2014, the EU has been spending in average about 1.2 billion euros per year on this. Deforestation will be included in in-country political dialogues where relevant, and the EU will ensure that the supported initiatives do not contribute to deforestation. We will work with partner countries to implement sustainable forest-based value chains and promote sustainable bioeconomies, and we will also scale up actions in relation to land and forest governance, such as the FLECT, Forest Law Enforcement Governance and Trade, through the recently adopted work plan for the period 2018 to 2022. The next two priorities is about strengthening international cooperation to halt deforestation, forest degradation, and encourage forest restoration. We will continue working and foster international cooperation, both at multilateral fora like the United Nations Forest Forum of Forest, the International Tropical Timber Organization, and numerous others, and also at bilateral level. As I previously said, action by the EU alone will have limited impact. We need a partnership approach. Also, in line with the political guidelines of President-elect von der Leyen to ensure the highest standards of climate and environment in trade agreements, we will include provisions on the conservation and sustainable management of forests, and further encourage trade of agricultural and forest-based products not causing deforestation or forest degradation. And we will step up implementation and enforcement of existing agreements. The fourth priority is about redirecting finance to support more sustainable land use practices. Actions under this priority build on experiences such as the EU External Investment Plan and regional blending facilities. We need to mobilize funding for forest protection. Sustainable investment is needed to address the drivers of deforestation. According to United Nations estimates, financing needs for sustainable forest management alone account between 60 and 140 billion euros a year worldwide. Also, a number of actions will consider deforestation in the context of the implementation of the EU Action Plan on Sustainable Finance. And finally, the fifth priority is about supporting research and innovation. In order to take informed decisions, we need high-quality data and information. We are currently working to define the scope of an EU observatory on deforestation, forest degradation, changes in the world's forest cover, and associated drivers in order to facilitate access to information on supply chains for public entities, consumers, and businesses. And this will enable better monitoring of trade flows down to national, regional, and local levels, and better access to timely information. And of course, we will support to continue the development of global and regional information systems to monitor the effects of forest fires. The next immediate steps will be the Forest Conference on Forest and Biodiversity that will take place in Brussels on the 4th and 5th of February 2020. In this conference, there will be various themes, but we will also address the progress on communication regarding several key actions. As I said already, we are working on setting up the multi-stakeholder platform, and we will soon send invitation for applications. And we are working also to launch the assessment of additional demand-side regulatory and non-regulatory measures, and also to establish the EU Observatory. And that was all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Kiitoksia komissio.
Thank you very much to the Commission. Perhaps I could remind members and speakers that we are going to have to finish at 2 p.m. The interpreters will have to finish at 2 p.m. So could I please encourage you to speak briefly if possible. Anyway, before the members get to speak, we've got a second guest speaker, and it's a science director from Chester Zoo, Dr. Simon Dowell. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you today about how we turned our city of Chester into the world's first sustainable palm oil city. My name is Simon Dowell, and I'm Science Director at Chester Zoo in the United Kingdom. In this presentation, I will start by telling you a little bit about Chester Zoo and go on to explain why palm oil is so important to us in addressing the issues of deforestation. And then I will present our Sustainable Palm Oil City project. So a few facts about Chester Zoo. We're based in the northwest of England, and we are the largest zoo in the UK, currently welcoming about 2 million visitors every year, which makes us the most popular paid-for visitor attraction outside of London. And it also provides us with a platform for communication of conservation messages to a wide cross-section of the public. We are a conservation charity, deriving almost all of our income from our visitors and our members, and all the profit goes back into delivering conservation. Now, our mission is preventing extinction, and we deliver this through conservation breeding of threatened species in our zoo, but also through field projects across 25 countries worldwide and public campaigns amongst our visitors and members. And one of our biggest programs has at its core the critically endangered orangutan. We've got 2 species in the zoo, and they're both part of Europe-wide breeding programs to provide insurance populations in captivity. But we also work in the field with our partners in Malaysia and Borneo to protect and regenerate the orangutan's tropical rainforest habitat along the Kinipatangan River. And it shares this with many other species of plants and animals. It's one of the most highest biodiversity regions in the world, and it faces threats from deforestation, particularly to make way for palm oil plantations. So palm oil is the most widely consumed vegetable oil on the planet. It is derived from the oil palm, a tropical plant originally from West Africa, but now grown across all the tropical regions. And palm oil is used in around 50% of packaged supermarket products. So when you go to the supermarket, chances are you're buying products with palm oil in them. And it includes many manufactured and processed foods such as biscuits, chocolate bars, margarine, ice cream, that sort of thing. Also soaps and detergents, and in many cleaning products. Now, the negative impacts of palm oil are represented here on the slide, and the key issue really is deforestation, especially on peat soils. An increased demand for palm oil has led to widespread deforestation, especially in Southeast Asia, and this is contributing, of course, to climate change. However, compared to other vegetable oils, palm oil has some distinct advantages. It is very high yielding. If we were to switch from producing vegetable oil from palm oil to other sources, we would need at least 6 times as much land to produce the same amount of oil. So banning palm oil is likely to be counterproductive. It just shifts the problem. It's also more versatile than other vegetable oils with a higher shelf life. And it is a significant part of the economy of several countries, and many lives and livelihoods are dependent on it. So, for example, in Indonesia, 4.5 million people are directly employed in the palm oil industry or through growing it. So we think palm oil is here to stay, and we don't think that calls for an outright ban are the answer. We believe that part of the solution is sustainable palm oil. So what exactly does that mean? Well, the Round Table on Sustainable Palm Oil is an international body that supports a widely recognised global certification system, and it's based on 7 principles around sustainability, covering good ethical business practice, workers' rights, and environmental protection. And their new standards that were announced in 2018 included no deforestation, no fires, and no planting on peat for any new plantations. So these are hugely encouraging and widely supported by conservation NGOs like ourselves. Now, currently, despite that, only 19% of palm oil grown globally is certified by the RSPO. And Europe is actually the most established consumer in terms of its commitment to sustainable palm oil. So many of your governments will have signed the Amsterdam Declaration, committing to 100% sustainable palm oil consumption by 2020. But we still need to increase demand, and this is where our role at Chester Zoo comes in, particularly with our large visitation and our great support from the public, in communicating our position and bringing individuals, communities, and businesses on board. Now, collaboration is the key to this, and I would like to emphasise the importance of our partners, supporters, and advisors who we have worked with across a wide range of sectors, and some are represented here. So our strategy is to provide a step-by-step approach for individuals and for businesses to make change as easy as possible. And we started by going through our entire supply chain for all the products used and sold at Chester Zoo. And where necessary, we switched to sources containing certified sustainable palm oil. And we developed a special tool for doing this, which we then translated through to restaurants in our city. So we've created the restaurant toolkit to enable other people to do it. And we're also communicating this to our visitors via interpretation in the zoo and via our online shopping list, which contains a list of brands that only have sustainable palm oil. And we encourage the public to make changes in steps, changing one brand at a time. So you might switch your biscuits one week and margarine the next week, and slowly you build up your shopping list and it contains sustainable palm oil. We've done a huge amount of work with schools as well across our region, communicating our message to pupils who then communicate that back to their parents. So central to this is our Sustainable Palm Oil City campaign for our home city of Chester. Now, Chester is a city of 118,000 people, relatively small, in the northwest of England. It's popular with tourists and commuters, but we have a number of established industries and businesses on our doorstep. So we decided to make Chester the world's first sustainable palm oil city. To create the campaign, we have followed a behaviour change model and really used our position as a leader in the community to engage other businesses and get them to change their practice. So we're modelling this a bit by example as well. Now, the process actually was relatively simple. 3 steps here to becoming a champion. And this starts with a pledge to make the change. Step 2 is about asking the businesses to change one product at a time, in the same way that we ask the public to do the same thing. And then step 3 is asking people to develop a policy and tell their clients and customers about it via their websites and through posters in their premises. But to give incentives, we wanted to offer gold stars. It's a bit like being at school, you get a gold star. So for a gold star, a business conducts a palm oil audit of its suppliers and seeks to ensure that all new products are from certified sustainable palm oil sources. Now, 2/3 of our champions have already achieved their gold star. But who exactly set the bar for becoming a sustainable palm oil city? Well, actually, we rather than reinvent the wheel and try and create this for ourselves, we set our threshold based on an established model which was provided by the Sustainable Fish City project, which was launched at the London Olympics in 2012 and is now across the UK, across 10 of our cities across the UK. And we used exactly the same criteria seen here, and the numbers are proportionate to the population size of our city. So our overall target was actually 38 businesses in total. So how did we do? Well, actually, we went over the target quite easily. We now have 53 champions, and we've met the thresholds for each business category. So we are now the world's first sustainable palm oil city, and we're adding more every week. And 35 of our champions have already achieved their gold star. In other words, they're auditing all of their suppliers. But the impacts of this go beyond the businesses themselves. So a variety of restaurants are involved, from small independents to fast food outlets and pub chains, and these help to set the social norm in the community. One of our manufacturers is Nine, which makes cereal bars and sells them nationally to major retail outlets, thus having a nationwide reach. And we're delighted to be working with Essential, who provide the school meals to all of our state-run schools, not just in the city of Chester, but across the wider county of Cheshire West. So that's 5 million school meals every year, all containing ingredients using only certified sustainable palm oil. And Essential have also gained RSPO certification for their company. And we've also engaged our local university, who persuaded their catering contractors, Tuco, to switch to certified sustainable palm oil, and they're now doing that across the country in other universities. We've also gained significant political support from our initiative, particularly from our local Member of Parliament, Chris Matheson, who until last week, when the election was called, was our political representative in Westminster. And he enabled us to host our event for our Sustainable Palm Oil project in the Houses of Parliament in London. It was attended by 127 people from 68 organisations and also from a cross-party group of MPs. There are many other impacts. Our results have been really positive. We've had a lot of interest from other cities. The city of Oxford is already embarking on their programme to become a sustainable palm oil city, and we've had interest from others in the EU and in Southeast Asia. We've won a number of industry awards, and we've built up a network of over 200 businesses in support of our campaign. And we've also received a lot of media attention, including from the BBC. And we're regularly invited to talk about the project at various events, and we have an increasing amount of interest in our online resources. And we're also beginning to have an impact on the school curriculum in our region through an innovative project that uses our campaign to bring the curriculum to life for a range of subjects. So we continue to influence at political and industry levels, and we're hoping to help the UK government achieve its target of having a 100% sustainable supply chain for palm oil by the end of 2020. If your town or city would like to join us, then we'd be delighted to hear from you. And there are resources on our website to help you, including the project guidelines, which can be downloaded. And there's my email address there. Thank you very much for listening, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dowell. That was a fantastic example of how local representatives can promote a global ecological balance, and I'm sure that there are many members who were listening to that who came up with ideas as to what they could actually do. So a wonderful example of a tangible measure. Okay, we've heard the presentation from the rapporteur. We've had the two presentations from our guest speakers. Now we've got DG Environment represented here, and I would like to mention a couple of points. As someone who's been rapporteur on two forest-related issues, it's very important that the European Union takes its global responsibility when it comes to forging trade agreements. We need to take into account deforestation. When you forge such agreements, we certainly made that point very strongly in our opinion. And in addition to acting in the area of trade policy, and I say this because the European Union is a very big player when it comes to development policy, together with the UN. So you have to take this whole issue into account, forestry, sustainable forestry, when you work in developing countries. There are all sorts of things happening in forests in developing countries. In Asia, a lot in Southeast Asia, a lot is happening. A lot of destruction is taking place, and it's because there's no proper forest management taking place there, and that means that you get criminals, you get big economic operators taking control of areas which were previously occupied by indigenous peoples. This is something that was pointed out in a statement from the UN Indigenous Peoples body last year, that you have to ensure that local government is in a position to manage forest resources, because if that doesn't happen, then people and their ecosystems are at risk. So yes, you need to look at trade policy, but you also need a real commitment to development policy. And I did want to say that because, you are talking about the green issues, that they're very important, and they have to be borne in mind when it comes to development policy. We can see that the United States is kind of distancing itself from all this. That means we've got an even bigger role to play as the European Union in development policy. So we've heard from me now, and members, you have the opportunity to ask questions of the rapporteur and the guests. Liemes.
I speak in Latvian. Es gribētu
I would like to thank all the colleagues for this work, and especially Mr. Ossi, the head of the committee, because this is my last meeting. I will enjoy my earned retirement, but it's very symbolic that the last point is linked to my surname, Lielmež, big forest, in German Grosswald. I am really worried when the lungs of our planet are being cut down. We hear about forests cut in Brazil, Canada, Russia, and we also have forest fires every year. And it means we have to be very careful. Therefore, I would like to congratulate the Commission on this initiative. We have to talk about these issues. We have to understand them. Just like our people have understood that CO2 emissions are bad and there should be sanctions. And we have to invite the European Commission, the Parliament, to provide support for producing oxygen. We need a mechanism, criteria, so that our member states, that could be small lungs of the planet, are not destroyed. When the big lungs are destroyed, I personally feel that a part of my lungs is damaged. Therefore, I believe that our Commission should still pay attention to this issue and has to develop a support mechanism and support is what stimulates it. And without oxygen, if we lack oxygen, then CO2 emission problem would be nothing. Thank you very much to everybody. Thank you very much for your attention. And thank you for our work.
Kiitoksia.
Thank you for that, Mr. Lielmež. Would anybody else like the floor at this juncture? I can't actually see anybody asking for the floor. So I'd now give the floor back to the rapporteur. Perhaps he would like to comment on what you've just said and what the speakers said, and maybe he could tell us a little bit about how he intends to take this process forward. Rapporteur, please.
Thank you, Chairman, for giving me this opportunity, and thank you to members of the Commission, especially for that very specific example, which can be exported into our local and regional communities. There's a stakeholder consultation which will be held on the 28th of November, and then in March next year we'll have the opinion in the Commission and then in the plenary. I hope we can get some extra interesting ideas from this Commission over the next few appointments. Of course, we're talking about climate change and deforestation here. Thank you.
Kiitos esittelijälle ja
Thank you very much to the rapporteur. And just to round off this discussion, let me say that we're now talking an awful lot about climate change and the global warming that brings with it. Against that backdrop, we represent here at the Committee of the Regions the diversity of Europe, different regions, and we have to make sure that we keep the focus on biodiversity and that way with biodiversity in forests we can protect ourselves better from global warming and climate change. And, I really wanted to get that point across. It's my last message to you across, and it's certainly something that we've said as a committee in our opinions on the forest strategy. So thank you to the rapporteur, Mr. Duss. Good luck with the opinion. Please cooperate with the members and let's come up with an opinion that will take matters forward. Thank you to you. Thank you to our guests. Thank you to the Commission. I do hope this will be useful input to guidelines for your future work. So that rounds off our work on item 6. Item 7, any other business? The Secretariat hasn't mentioned anything to me. Does anybody else have anything to raise? It seems not. So let's move on to 8, confirmation of the date of the next meeting in the new mandate. That has been confirmed as the 5th of March 2020. And we'll soon be breaking for lunch. Perhaps I could just take this last opportunity to say thank you to you. If someone, for whatever reason, can't come along to the lunch, let me say thank you to the Secretariat, thank you to the interpreters, the secretaries of the different political groups. Thank you for the last 2.5 years together. This was the end of the last meeting of the NAT Commission during this mandate, and I now adjourn that meeting.